Former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela says the key to rooting out corruption in South Africa might just be through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Billions have been siphoned from the fiscus over the past few years. Madonsela argues that giving amnesty to corrupt people would allow the country to start on a clean slate. And to speak to us on this matter is, of course, Madonsela herself. Good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. Let's just begin here. These sentiments come at a time when we're seeing arrests that are coming at the back of the Zondo Commission. Why now?
Good evening. Why now? It's because it's very clear that we have a deep-seated problem of corruption, but it's also clear that we will need all of the evidence, number one, to pin down everyone who has committed a crime of corruption, but secondly, to find out what happened to the money so that we can get it back. And without whistleblowers, we're not going to be able to get the full truth.
And you then suggest that, of course, that we should consider, sentiments around people that have played a minimal but critical role. And how then do we determine this minimal and critical role? Would you say someone like Angela Grita is one of those?
Not really, but thank you so much that at least you did read, because I've been crucified for trying to cut some slack for my friends or my comrades, etc. And people have misread me to be saying that the kingpins should get this kind of relief. It is somebody who is, for example, a clerk or an admin officer in a procurement system or a finance, or maybe a CFO. The person would not have been the originator of the scene of corruption, but they were critical in that they had to sign something or they had to pay someone. And this would be somebody who's relatively junior in the food chain, but feared losing their jobs. And I have, as a public protector, come across cases where people were practically fired for using too much toilet paper. And so people would have had a real fear that they would lose their job. Or maybe there was a bit of a financial incentive when they themselves were going through a financial crisis. But they were not the person who initiated and the key beneficiary of the corrupt deeds.
And aren't you trying to reverse then the process that you yourself started? Because the commission comes at the back of your recommendations. Is this because you don't have confidence in what the Deputy Chief Justice is trying to do?
I have absolute full confidence. But remember, not all corruption is going into the State Capture Commission. That's what we have to understand. That not the State Capture Commission, in fact, already is doing far more than what it was meant to do. But even though it's doing far more than what it was meant to do, it's not capturing the whole problem of corruption in the country. There's still a systemic problem of corruption in parastatals, or state-owned enterprise, in local government. We haven't even started dealing with the law enforcement agencies or the oversight agencies, the ones that are supposed to be holding people accountable. We haven't even started to look at to what extent were these themselves captured. And people are only going to be able to come forward if that would not mean that they're hanging themselves.
And some have come out, as you alluded to this earlier, that they've come out to say that you are trying to protect particularly the interests of some, maybe even including those in business. Others have gone as far as suggesting that you're trying to protect those that are behind the collapse of Steinhoff. What do you say to that?
Well, firstly, that's not true, but I understand where people come from. When I checked my Twitter timeline, what I read from the people is they have had enough of corruption. They've had enough of high-powered people doing things with impunity. And when they see something like this, they immediately get afraid that here is it again, high-powered people doing wrong things and getting away with it. Because they know that the little guy, the policeman, the clerk, just for dropping small things, even before they steal, they lose their jobs. So I do understand exactly where people come from and where the anger comes from. But as somebody who investigates and as somebody who deals with people who also deal with investigations, I'm still involved in Transparency International, and I'm part of the committee or the council that plans the anti-corruption conference every year, and we're busy planning one. And I do know that the most successful investigations are those that often have people who are inside and people who participated in the crime. And in the State Capture Commission, we've gotten a whole lot of information, and that's wonderful. But I'm still just concerned about people who are going to give us the documents and people who are going to tell us where did the money go to. And not just from the State Capture Commission, throughout. The idea, Bongi, is to clean out the system, because if we don't remove the poison that has been left in the system by the corrupt people, that little poison is going to grow. And in another 5 to 10 years' time, these little corrupt people would have become bigger corrupt criminals.
But are we not running the risk then of making them bigger if they know that they are going to be getting some kind of amnesty? Because corruption is corruption, whether you're giving 50 rand to a traffic officer to try and escape a fine, or that clerk is transporting whatever it is at that particular point in time. Are we then not feeding to corruption when it comes to, this particular point of them not being held accountable for their actions?
We are, if we're giving people the impression that if you commit a crime, at some stage you'll get a get out of jail free card, we would be encouraging corruption. But what I'm suggesting is similar to what is universally used as plea bargaining. There's these people who robbed the bank. Some guy just drove the getaway car. He's afraid of going to jail. He gives us all of the necessary information. He might go to jail, but for lesser number of years than he would have gone, or he might not go to jail. So what I'm offering is something similar to plea bargaining, but it's not to stop people from being held accountable. It is to encourage more people to come forward, because trust me, the number of people that we have seen at the State Capture Commission telling us the truth are not even 10% of the people that have been involved in state capture.
The concern, though, is that if we are to take this clerk and the fact that they went to go drop off a money bag somewhere or they authorized something, that particular move placed a certain community in a disadvantaged position, because we have been seeing what state capture and the effects thereof have done to various communities. What then do we say to communities that do not have service delivery because of one person that decided to be a go-between?
Well, Bongi, 100% of nothing is nothing. Do you agree with me?
I do.
If you agree with me, the people we're trying to flush out are people who haven't been caught. They're people who are in the system and they're not implicated yet because nobody has told us about them. But we're asking them to come out because in any event, someday we will discover them. It might be in 10 years' time, it might be in 20 years' time, but we're asking them to come out now and tell us that they were involved and this is what went down and this is where the money is. So this doesn't involve people who have already told us what happened, because those who have already told us what happened, there's no inducement. This is to induce those who are quiet, but they know that they were part of committing a crime.
But how do we then begin to reverse the effects of state capture on Goku Dlamini?
Well, this is part of reversing the effects of state capture on Goku Dlamini, because Goku Dlamini has been affected in two ways. One is development has been stunted, policies were distorted, and in some instances, progress couldn't be made because every time there's a disputed tender, then we can't move forward. So that's just one thing. The second thing is obviously the fact that we paid for work that wasn't done and we paid for shoddy work, which is a great part of corruption. If we uncover the truth and the whole truth, we begin to know how does corruption start? How do people get involved? and how do we stop all of these leakages? But secondly, these people who are in the system will have to decide the extent of their culpability. Do we keep them in the system, or do we send them for rehabilitation, or do we fire them? Because right now, as I'm speaking to you, there are people in the system. What has happened with PPEs was bound to happen because the people who were corrupted during the intensity of corruption years are still in the system. And when it came to the PPEs, those kinds of elements played out.
But how then do we comfort Goku Dlamini, who has been cheated by this councillor that, carried out a corrupt act in order to put her at a disadvantage? And then Goku Dlamini then hears that we are now giving a lesser sentence to the very person on the ground that has really dealt with her harshly. Would she be proud of us?
She will if she understands the theory. It's the same way as when there are 16 guys that robbed a bank. We don't give them the same number of years for sentence. Those who have collaborated with us, with the investigators, and even those who have turned into state witnesses get a better deal. It's the same principle that those who can help us to dig deeply into the corrupted state of South Africa and cut corruption at its roots should in some way be met halfway.
All right. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I certainly do appreciate it. That was Thuli Madonsela, the Social Justice Chair and AMPLAN Convener at Stellenbosch University.